If you're thinking about high limit business credit cards, you might be asking yourself similar questions that I had. Like, one, when we're talking high limit, what kind of limits are we talking about? Two, why would I get a high limit credit card instead of maybe a more traditional business loan? And three, well, what are the best options out there? To find out, I tapped Ken Boyd. He's a former CPA and accounting professor who's published a number of books on the topic of accounting. So he's the perfect person to help me understand high limit business cards beyond what I would just find on Google.
Just to start, if someone is looking for a high limit credit card, like what kind of limits can they expect? What constitutes a high limit? And are we talking about like a traditional credit card with a revolving balance? Are we also talking about more like charge card style?
So we're talking about cards that are credit cards where you can carry a balance forward. We are not talking about charge cards, although I'll say something about ramp in a minute. Typically, these high limit cards may have a balance from $5,000 up to $40,000, give or take. However, there are companies that, because of their credit history and their size, can have limits above 40,000, but 5,000 to 40,000 is the range. And on charge cards, people need to know that with the Ramp charge card, that as you grow with Ramp, you get a credit history, that Ramp does reassess the limit on your charge card, and you can get a higher limit on your charge card. So that's true of Ramp, and people should know that. But what we're talking about here is credit cards.
You saying around like up to $40,000 is kind of in the range of what a high limit credit card is?
Yeah, so a few that I looked at that I'll talk about later. One had the average balance was about 8,000. The other one had an average balance of about 15,000 among all their users. And these, as I'll mention later, are two of the big money center banks that issue these cards.
Okay, so I know from past conversations with Ken that borrowing money isn't the only reason that businesses need a business card. But if you do want to borrow, maybe to invest in technology upgrades for your business or to build up inventory ahead of the busy season, why would you use a high limit business card rather than a traditional business loan?
Well, it seems like kind of a lot of money to have on a credit card, which usually have pretty high interest rates. So, like, why would a business need a high limit credit card rather than having something like a business loan that might have a lower APR?
It's a great question. Obviously, you want it. One benefit is it gives you more spending power if you have a $20,000 limit rather than a $5,000 limit. But another thing we're talking about is called the credit utilization rate. And what that means is that of the available credit on your card, how much of that credit are you using? So if you have a higher limit and you continue to spend only the amount that you usually spend, you are using less of the available credit, which from a credit score concept helps you. So if you're using 20% of the balance and you go to a bigger card with a higher limit and now you're only using 10% of the balance, you have a better credit score because your credit utilization rate is lower. Because in the eyes of the credit issuer, if you're starting to use and have utilization up to the limit of the card, it's a higher risk that you won't repay. So you'd like a lower credit utilization score. And also, there are perks and rewards that are more attractive with high limit cards if you spend more money.
And I guess you kind of have addressed this question in that last answer, but I don't know if there's anything more that you want to elaborate on, like giving examples of how having access to a high limit credit card can benefit your business.
Yeah, one thing I didn't cover on your last question is why would you use high limit versus a bank loan? So let's say, for example, that you have an expensive purchase and you spend $10,000. If you're going to use the high limit card, ideally you would pay off that entire 10,000 in 30 days and not incur interest on it. However, if you had to carry over a balance, rather than pay 15 to 25% interest on a credit card, it would make more sense to get a line of credit or a loan, buy it, use part of the loan to make the $10,000 purchase, and the business loan would have a much lower rate than using the credit card. So that's the difference there.
What should a business look for in a high limit credit card, and how do they differ between each other in terms of costs and benefits?
To answer that question, there's two examples that I pull. One is from Chase. So this is a high-end card because this is the card with the highest average balance that I found, $15,000. So it's from Chase. It's called Chase Sapphire Reserve. You've got to have about a 700 credit score to get the card, which is a good but not excellent score. It has all kinds of perks. So if you're traveling and doing a lot of traveling, they have incredible perks. That's the good news. The bad news is they have a very complex point system. You're gonna have to invest time to make sure that you get the points. When can I access the points? And they also charge an annual fee that's almost $800. And the reason they do that $800 annual fee finances a lot of the marketing and setup and legal that they have to have this high-end card. So that's a benefit where you have a big available balance, you have lots of perks for travel. That's the great news, but you do have to pay an $800 fee, and it's complicated to follow.
It's funny you talk about that. You've mentioned that before, that like it's usually kind of better to actually go for a card that has more simple benefits. I'm myself, we actually have a card that has benefits like you're describing. And that was part of the reason we adopted that card, is it had, interesting benefits. We were interested in doing more travel. But to be honest, I've had that card now for 6 years, and I don't think I've ever once used the benefits because I don't really understand it.
Exactly. Because nobody wants to invest the time because it's so time consuming. So on that note, one that had a simpler setup was Citibank has a card. Citi has a card called Double Cash. The average person has about an $8,000 credit limit on it, but they just do 2% cash back. Now, what's interesting is that's the perk. You get 1% when you use the card of the 2%. You get the other 1% when you pay back the balance. So you're motivated and incentivized to pay back the balance to get the other rest of the 2%. It doesn't have an annual fee, and it does, like some of these cards, offer a 0% intro APR for a period of time, which a lot of these cards offer. They offer a 0% APR, many of them. They give you a lot of points and perks just for signing up at the beginning. Most of them have introductory setups like that. However, for these cards, if you do carry a balance, you're going to end up paying 15 to 25% or more APR on the balance. So you get a higher credit limit, you've got lots of perks, and in this case, cash back, but it can be complicated and it can be very expensive if you carry a balance.
All right, that makes sense. But like I mentioned, I know that long-term borrowing isn't the only reason, or even the main reason, that businesses need business cards. If you're paying off that balance monthly to avoid expensive interest charges, then a business charge card might make even more sense than a credit card. And if spending limits are your concern, my understanding is that Ramp spending limits, they grow dynamically based on your cash flow and your sales, up to 30 times higher than traditional cards. Plus, there's a simple cashback reward for using it. And, well, it sounds like a bunch of other reasons that save not just money, but your time.
I guess up till now we've been talking about credit cards, but now we're kind of talking also about being able to pay them off on a monthly basis so that you're not incurring those APR charges. Ramp is not a traditional credit card in the sense that you're not carrying over a balance, but it operates more like a charge card. How else, I guess, is it different from the other options out there?
What I love about Ramp is Ramp addresses something that I talk about all the time, which is automation helps you track expenses and prevent overspending, and automation prevents fraud. The great thing about the Ramp card is that it addresses both of those highlights. Because if you can imagine, if you've got a Ramp card, you can take a receipt, scan it, it automatically goes into Ramp. The card administrator, the manager, automatically sees the spending. You can set up controls by vendor and by category so that if you're issuing cards to other people, they're limited on what the types of things they can spend on. So you have that control at the front end. You can set up alerts for people to approve the spending once it hits. And there's no personal guarantee or personal credit check for the business owner. So it keeps the personal finances separate from business finances. So I love the Ramp card because if you take advantage of that system, you're going to be able to see spending in real time. You're going to be able to categorize expenses correctly. You'll avoid overspending. You'll know exactly where you stand from an expense standpoint. So I think there's all kinds of benefits to using the Ramp charge card as opposed to credit cards.
Anything else that we should talk about high limit credit cards?
The one other thing I'll mention is as you look at high limit credit cards, also look at what rate would I pay on a line of credit and or what rate would I pay on a business loan? For example, maybe you can factor your receivables and get a loan based on receivables that haven't been collected yet. Look at all your options before you go out and use a high limit credit card because carrying over a balance is so expensive. Check for other sources of financing before you use a high limit credit card.
Big thanks to Ken for walking me through that. I've never had to look at high limit business cards before, but it sounds like there's some pretty good options depending on your needs. And if you got as much from that conversation as I did, well, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Ramp for more expert tips on how your business can save time and save money. See you next time.